emotional intelligence, empathy is a huge proponent of that, right? But at the end of the day, to pull out of people what they didn't know was in them takes them to trust you, to guide them to places that they didn't necessarily feel comfortable going, right? So when I talk about my own team, a lot of things that we're doing today we weren't doing before, and that's because we didn't know, right? Fear, false evidence appearing real. We were fearful because we didn't understand how that would affect the business, right? Regardless of how much research we did or how much data we reviewed, we were just stuck in kind of this is what we've done historically. But again, in building that trust and understanding my team individually, it allowed them to follow me into places again that they were fearful to go. And the fruits of that labor, right, eventually show. And, the next time that we're asked to do that big thing or that big task, it's a no-brainer for them, so long as they trust that leader.
So it sounds like you create an environment where it's okay to fail. It's okay to take a chance. It's okay to fail. I think it's really important that your team knows it's okay to fail, because you only fail if you're trying something.
Absolutely. And it's okay to fail in front of, superiors, if you will, right? So, without that practice, without them having a seat at the table, they'll never get better. So I want everyone to answer this, but I want to kind of go down this path a little. How do you deal with failure when one of the people reporting to you or one of your employees fails, which you are allowing because it's a growth experience? How do you encourage them? Because I can see that being very demotivating and very uncomfortable for someone. And I'm asking because I don't have a good answer for this. How do you turn that around into a learning experience to make them feel good about themselves? Do they see you protecting them, right? In that same environment and in that same setting. And so I think you have to be strategic, and when you do bring them into the room or at the table, they also see that you'll protect them along the way, even when they do make mistakes.
Which question did you want us to answer now? Okay. How your traits that you described as help you in overcoming challenges, or you and your employees?
Yeah. So, I feel super, super blessed to work for an organization that has a very long, enduring, successful culture. And part of my challenge is actually to maintain that which is the jewel in the company, their culture, despite the times changing. And one of the deep tenets of our culture is people. And as leaders, then I feel in today's times, I had mentioned, humility and empathy is really key. And when you get to our positions, you think you've done a lot, you've accomplished many things, you're like this warrior, I know, I'm experienced, I'm an elder, right? But the most important thing... Wait a minute, elder. I am an elder. I know, I am an elder. Like the first time when I was described as a veteran, I'm like, oh my God. I'm not. But, now I'm just like going with it. So the reality is being a leader is a huge responsibility. You are taking care of people. You are affecting lives. Your businesses affect lives. So our job is to think about everyone. And even as my example, right? Like we went through this acquisition, and we have for a long time actually been thinking we need an external partner to fuel our growth. And we've always been proud about being private and always running things ourselves. So it was really important to find the right partner, and this situation was good. But we had to think about the impact on our people, on our customers, and our founders, certainly there were things that we knew enriched certain people in the organization, but we actually gave transaction bonuses to everyone. And so when you think through, like, and the messaging that we did, like, the messaging was really, like, important in terms of that. So part of what we had to do was really think of the various different audiences and how they were going to be affected. Like, this is constantly something that we do in our leadership team. Whenever we implement change, whenever we do anything, we actually really think about the people, and we think about, like, the you might say the smallest person in the organization, the least powerful person in the organization when we think about how we make a decision or how we roll out things.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it more from an organizational perspective. Two of the things that I mentioned were communication and adaptability. And so when we take a look at the environment that we're in today, the EOs are the executive orders. And again, not for everybody, but for us in particular, focusing on affordable housing, they have hit us particularly hard. And so when we think about, we have it, one of our strategic pillars is specifically like race related, like it is racial equity. And so how do we stay true to ourselves and yet still try to navigate within these uncertain times, right? And I'm not trying to make this a political conversation at all, because we could be here all day, I'm sure, with varying views. And so the adaptability of it and the communication around it to our employees has been extremely critical. Because as you can imagine, there's this sense of uncertainty, like, are we gonna change who we are? Are we gonna change our mission? Are we gonna change our strategic pillars? And so being able to adapt and more importantly, communicate. And so our CEO has sent out weekly communications, right? One of my colleagues is here, Sean, right? So weekly communications. We have somewhat changed the format of our town halls. And so they're much more, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say authentic and vulnerable, meaning that we don't have the answers, right? Nobody has the answers. And if anybody does, please talk to me afterwards and knows what's going to happen next. I would love to know that. And so it's around, how do you change the communication pattern that you had before? And I think sometimes when we say communication to an organization, we sometimes make that a big scary word, like, oh, it's communication, and it doesn't have to be. It's things like creating group chats. We've created office hours around our DE&I strategy, right? Do we still call it DE&I? Like, what do we do, right? And so really just trying to open up how we communicate and the tools and the vehicles in which to communicate has really been a good thing. And so again, our employees are looking to us, so trustworthiness also comes into it, right? Looking to us as leaders to say, hey, how are you gonna help us navigate? And we've had some of our funding frozen, right? And thankfully, over the last few weeks, we've found out that that's now no longer the case. Are there different rules and regs that we might have to follow and maybe change some of our language? Yes. But does it mean that we're not holding true to who we are? No. Right? And so again, being able to communicate that authentically and to be able to say, you're walking down the hall and someone says, how are you doing today? And I'm like, shitty, actually. If I can say that, like, this is not a good day and it's not a good week. And people can relate to that. And it kind of takes me back to COVID times when, I don't know for you guys, if people were looking at you within your organization, like, are you human? I was showing up, my hair was all over the place. My husband's a firefighter, right? So he was gone, I was all over the place, no makeup. And it's almost felt like that in some ways, because every day is something different. And yet still be able to come forward and say, but you know what? We're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna be fine. We're not gonna go out of business. Affordable housing is an issue for everybody in this country, actually around the world, quite frankly. And we're going to be okay. So to me, the communication is a really big piece of it, and the trustworthiness, and just being able to think differently.
Let's keep going with communication. And by the way, speaking of shitty days, I've come down with something, so I'm sorry if I'm coughing here. I'm not usually.
Sorry for the foul language too, by the way. I've not enough coffee yet.
I have tea, thank you. I'm good, and I've got some drops here. But anyway, we'll carry on. I'm not that sick. But let's talk about communications more and techniques, because it's interesting. On our flight over here, we were just at my CHRO and I were at a different meeting, and we were flying over here, and she said, and we're a small shop. We've got 240 some odd employees, dispersed across 22 locations, but within a tight geographic region. And she said, we're missing that all hands on sort of being together, talking, whether it's virtual. And she was asking me, don't you think, we're going through a lot of change too. We've changed our electronic medical record, we've changed who we work with, lots of things. And she said, I feel like we're missing something. So help me, you were talking about communication, others, strategies for communication. You're much bigger than I am, your workforces, but must have bigger challenges. What are the effective means of communicating with your employees?
Yeah, so we're going through a major transformation on top of already change. We have a huge transformation that's impacting every single person within the organization. And one of the things that we have done is, and again, this may be commonplace for some, but for us it was not, we've created change champions within the organization. And so senior leaders have identified who are those real key agents that can help you communicate. But I would tell you, in some cases, it's good because you're getting feedback, but sometimes the change agents aren't really the change agents. But that's good to know, right? So you understand where the resistance is in the organization, and then you can prepare for that effectively. Again, we also now have, before the town halls, we will bring our senior leadership team together, and we will give them a preview of what's coming in the town hall so that they're able to actually answer the questions and actually be the advocates before you get to the town hall, so they have a precursor of what's coming. And if there's any questions, sometimes it's really quiet in those meetings, but not always. But what happens is afterwards, the chatter is, well, what does that mean? How does that impact me? How should I respond to this? And so we're trying to get better at really providing the tools to our senior leaders to be able to navigate through the times. What do you say if somebody comes up to you and says, am I going to be out of business? Or am I losing my job? Or is my title changing? Am I being demoted? How do you respond to that, right? So really creating those toolkits and really taking advantage of our shared drive and being able to create a specific place within the shared drive for our senior leaders, for our mid-managers, and for employees to go and get the answers so that they're not always having to come to HR. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what we've been doing.
I want to take it up a notch, the question of communications from a strategic perspective, because after all, this is a strategy session. I think one of the things that is really important, and if many of you are in HR, is to really invest in identifying your employment brand. Because brand is what creates loyalty. Brand is what creates trust. So if you understand your brand as a leadership team, your brand as an organization, all the communications you do should reinforce that brand, whatever the situation is, so that there's kind of an anchor to everything that's going on. And then there are, in today's times, the channels, there's so many channels, there's so many platforms to manage, and people like to receive their communications in different ways. The thoughtfulness that has to come with messaging is also important. It has to be simple because there's so much noise, right? So it has to be, the message has to be clear. And then the last thing is, communication is two-way. So you should also have strategies in any change, like what you described, that you have a way to get feedback. So, and the larger the organization is, the more dispersed it is, the more challenging that can be. But that gets into the adaptability of the communication. No matter how much you plan things and you think you're doing this, right message, and you get a different response, you have to be able to pivot right away, right? So it's good to get a lot of feedback. So everything that you do kind of has to have this framework so that the communication system stays strong and healthy and reliable.
No, I was definitely going to say that. I mean, brand and identity is super important to, the continuity of communication, right? We talk about, I was in the healthcare field for many years, and we always talked about continuity of care, right? And a pillar of continuity of care is continuity of information, right? How are we doing that? I'm a geriatric millennial, right? So, it wasn't too long ago, but it wasn't, so I still, I remember what intrigued me, and I try to keep in mind what I wish, older leaders kept in mind when I was first coming into the healthcare workforce or the corporate workforce. I think there's a point, right? You have to have your champions, so which we will call influencers, right? What are we expecting leaders to do? Are we expecting them to inspire? Are we expecting them to motivate? Are we expecting them to be able to lead, meaning that are people willing to follow them? Because I've had many, people come across my desk that I thought were super competent, right? They had the skills, the proof was in the pudding, but their teams weren't willing to follow them. And so, at that point, it didn't matter to me how good they were at the job. They were terrible at communicating. They were terrible at that continuity of information. They were terrible at trust building, right? But, just to bring it all together, I also agree. Understand who you are as a business. Get your influencers in the business to help you promote and have your back when there is pushback happening. And ERGs, right? I don't know if they exist anymore because I don't hear a whole lot about them, but that is a platform that encourages multi-generational conversation, right? So when you look at, we have the caregivers ERG, we have young parents in there, we have, older parents in there that are now taking care of their parents and able to give those stories to each other. What is hospice? What is the difference between hospice and palliative care? What resources do we have for that? And then we visit those ERG sessions, right? We make sure that HR, at least, every quarter is in those ERG sessions asking, hey, here are our benefits plans, here are our resources, what do you feel that you're struggling with? What should we consider as we approach our renewal in negotiations with our partners, and how we hold them accountable to resources that we need across our thought workers, right? So.
Thank you. You had me at geriatric millennial. I love that. I'm going to use that again. I'm a boomer, so okay, let's get to AI. So, before we came here this morning, we had our panels. We just met each other. Australia and I, we just met each other. And we said, here's where we're going to go. And I said AI. He said, well, no, this is about strategic leadership. I said, yeah, we're going to talk about AI and strategic leadership. So, how many on the panel are using it just tactically in your companies? Are you using AI for anything? You're using it, yeah. So now we're going to imagine the application of generative AI in strategy, in strategic leadership. I'm going to focus on 5 different areas. The first is time and task organization. Talk to me about how you think AI might support time and task organization. And I'll tell you one anecdote. I learned it at a Connexion meeting. I think it was in Las Vegas last year. There was a nurse, a chief nursing officer at a hospital whose nurses were burned out. The documentation, the amount of work, and they put in Copilot. And it gave them back some bandwidth, and the job satisfaction grew. So can you think of an application for time and task management in your companies where AI might be able to help you? This is brand new world for us, all of us here, because we're not using it in this way. So this is the vamping part of the presentation here.
Well, you already talked about it. We also have Copilot, and so I've always thought that again, being an elder, I've seen different waves of new technologies and new things coming on board, and I'm just gonna spin it a little bit. Sorry, Susan. The thing we have to think about. And even raising, 2 children who are now adults who are also contributors to the world. It's been like how scared we were about the internet and having this access and all of that. It's really important to ground people on what the organization is about, what the goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, how feasible are the goals that you're setting. Because the reality is we will get more efficient with Copilot, with AI, and then we're going to demand more on our people. So that's what's happened, right? Like that's why things are so fast. So our job as leader is create an environment that can sustain growth. And so, yes, definitely promote the tools that are there, use it, make it available, put guardrails, right? Because our job is also to manage risks and make sure we protect our organizations. Promote it, promote that, and use it and say, you know, this is available so we can expect to ratchet more in terms of productivity. That will force people to use it, right? But again, as leaders, we have to maintain that balance. But yes, definitely try the tools, do all those things, which we do. It's certainly there.
So it's interesting because the example I gave the nurse I met last year, she was using it because it gave them more bandwidth. But I think Estrella's point is, if all of a sudden we have more time, are we going to demand more? And the guardrails are important because I guess you have to see, what is your goal? Is your goal to give people, burnout's huge in medicine right now, burnout. So is the goal for me to give my physicians, give my providers a little bit more breathing room? Or is my goal for them to see another patient? And those are two very different directions. That's a very important piece.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, how many people in the room even know what Copilot is?
I didn't last year when I was at this meeting, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so to answer your question around time and task organization, I mean, of course, you can use it to summarize your notes or take the notes and give you the output, but kind of going off of what you're saying, right? I think you need to you need to make sure that employees understand that there will be some jobs, absolutely, I don't want to sit here and be naive, that will go away because of AI. But I think that the messaging around how does this actually help you succeed and actually be more productive is really important. Because otherwise, just if you think about it from a change management perspective, right, you're still seeing in pockets where there's this resistance, right? So how are you able to demonstrate to your organization that this is actually a benefit for you? Like we're not trying to take your job away, we're trying to help you do your job better. And then to your point, if it's going to save you 3 hours of note taking or summarizing notes and being able to send out, hey, here's the follow-up, you have to be very intentional, or what are you going to do and what do you expect with that extra time? Because if you're not, it can become very unproductive time. And so you don't want that to happen either. But we haven't started using that, at least formally, within our organization. I think the other thing that we're trying to overcome, and again, I have a coworker here can attest to this. We were in a meeting and we're working with Korn Ferry and was a consultant, and she asked us to come up with these ideas and basically kind of said, hey, don't cheat and use AI. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's this perception around, are you cheating if you're using AI? And I will tell you, I had people within my team, there's about 12, come to me and say, what's your perspective on AI? If I use AI, am I cheating? Do you consider me cheating? And so I think we need to be crystal clear on what is the purpose of AI. And again, it's not cheating, you're actually being resourceful. But I think if you don't communicate that and let your employees know that, they're gonna try to do it on the side and pretend like they didn't use it. Like for me, I'm like, hey, yeah, this is brought to you by Mickey and Petey from AI. So you have to make sure that you're just being authentic and not trying to say I didn't use it, because then it creates a different type of culture.
Yeah, I just comment when we talk about healthcare, just reflecting on my healthcare days, how many times I have to chase doctors to sign POCs or provide their notes, or even PTs even, right? So it is a scary idea to think that, AI will be integrated in some way. Will it miss different, comorbidities that we look for that might be influencing other diagnoses, right? It's just a huge conversation. I think healthcare could, we can do a whole another session on that. But that was just a thought that came to my head. I think as it pertains to AI and how we use it, where I currently am, it's accessibility, right? I think when we think about our workforce and how the neurodiverse population in our workforce is increasing, right? We have to recognize that whether it's due to people finding out later in life that they are neurodiverse, or that we're specifically looking for, an increase in our neurodiverse population to diversify our workforce, right? And so what accessibility tools do we have to enable them, especially as leaders, to be able to communicate and work with atypical, atypicals. And so, I think it's a big piece of work that's fascinating and we're continuing to discover. I mean, Copilot is one, but there's so many tools out there that I think we just need to leverage more and think about it, from a non-healthcare standpoint, even just an HR standpoint. How are we describing and providing this as a way to better accessibility?
So bringing it back to just the strategy and leadership and how we can use this, how about in decision making? Can you see applications for AI? I sort of think as a test gymnasium to test different scenarios. Can anyone imagine, and I'm imagining with you because I don't do this right now, but how we might use AI to help decision making? If then,
Yeah, I would say, I think the thing I would be most comfortable with now, and I think we do a bit of this, is just the data collection, right? And being able to identify trends within the organization to say, hey, this is a trend that we didn't even think about, or this is a data set that we didn't even think about, right? That AI has prompted us to take a look at. And so, otherwise, especially given surveys, right? So, we have so many surveys, and people are like, please, not another survey. So how do we integrate that into things like our open enrollment process, like our ERG communities, right? And so if we can involve AI in those different platforms, in those different social engagement platforms, if you will, then it can provide a lot of good data for us that we didn't otherwise know we had, or trends that we didn't otherwise know we had. And so I think that's one way that it's been informative, and it will continue to inform us further in the future about benefits, about employee satisfaction, about, professional and personal development and what that looks like.
Oh, I was just going to say a lot of assumptions are made in the decision-making process. So I think one of the things that AI can really help with is pulling data to validate certain assumptions that are being made. And also, if you're anticipating certain risks based on the decision sets that you have, it's also a good way to test out like the scenario building, as you had said.
Yeah, and I would say somewhat, not necessarily decision making per se, but somewhat related. So I was just at a 3-day conference and with HR and a group of CHROs, and the last day was actually specifically only on AI. And there was a woman there who spoke about she created agents that were in the form of her CEO and COO. And how she utilized AI was that she would take decks and she would upload them and then go to the agent and say, what's missing from the CEO's perspective? What's missing from the COO's perspective? Now, very transparently, that was way over my head. I'm like, what is she talking about, right? How do you even do that? But the way that she populated the agent, right, was she used 360 surveys. There was a list of questions that she herself were able to answer kind of in the voice of her CEO, just kind of knowing the types of questions and how she interacted with him. And same thing with the COO. And she also did one for the CFO, but it was still being built. And she said inevitably what happened is that it made those decks and the questions and being able to anticipate it, that her meetings that were about an hour long ended up being cut down to about 30 minutes because they were already answering all the questions. So decision making, maybe not directly, but I think in an indirect way, the agents were helping her be able to build a very thoughtful presentation deck on whatever it was. I thought that was fascinating. Way over my head, but it was fascinating.
Let's move on to EQ. You like that phrase, being a geriatric millennial. I like that. Emotional intelligence. I'm going to give you a real life story. Last night, sitting at the cocktail hour, I was sitting with with someone and I was talking about, I have a management employee and I'm just really angry. I mean, this person is not doing what they're doing. And I'm having a hard time because as a leader, I've got to be able to support and coach, but this person is not getting the job done. And I said, and the person I was talking to said, why don't you have AI write the letter? You can go first because you're hot. So it did, and I said, it's not conveying the anger that I feel. And this is what I got. I'm going to read it to you. Expressing extreme anger in a written document can be misinterpreted, demotivate the employee, or escalate the situation unnecessarily. It's often better to convey strong emotions verbally in a controlled setting. That's my EQ. That's helping because I was hot, I'm angry, but it calmed me down, and it's right. And I'm sorry, it is right. You can't put in a letter what I wanted to say, and I have to, and I'm not sure. I'll let you know next year if this person's still with me or not.
Just don't hit send.
It'll feel good, it's very, But in my mind, I see that as AI supporting my emotional intelligence. And maybe it's transient. I'd like to think I can be reasonable and when the time calls, but in that moment, that calmed me down a little bit. Any other thoughts on AI for EQ? I know I'm challenging myself.
Well, I'm just going to stick with the message that I have, which is first, as leaders, you must set the expectation. So if you set the expectation and the tone that the culture you have in your organization is one that's focused on people, on encouraging motivation, on encouraging healthy relationships, then people know to be a good leader in your organization, you must have EQ. And then there are all these supercharged tools now. You have no excuse that because you're busy or whatever, you have no excuse. You have AI. Use AI. Actually, my employee relations folks love it because it used to be the managers would run to them and say, I have this situation, blah, 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 and and they're trying to coach them, they're trying to script things for them, and they would write all the things. Now it takes them a couple of minutes to help those. And then they tell them, you could use this. So now they don't have to run to them. It's exactly like your example.
Well, so I guess similar to yours, mine has been just as, and I don't think I really thought about it from an EQ perspective, but when you're writing like performance reviews, right? I'll take it, copy it, and dump it in there, and all of a sudden it just sounds so much better, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I really was trying to say. Yeah. Or I will then say, but I'm missing X, Y, and Z, or how do I say, you're horrible at that, right? and it'll come back and it'll give me like the right words to say. And so I really haven't thought about it in terms of really EQ. I really thought about it in terms of communication, but in reality, I think it's both. It's both.
Yeah, what I'm saying that it's learning for me. This is supporting my ability to be a good leader, I think so. Right.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I think it's a good foundational tool, right? I don't want to negate the fact that there's not like a vanilla or a peanut butter spread type of way to respond to people, right? A lot of times we dump stuff in ChatGPT or in an AI platform, and we say, help me say this better, without consideration of who is this individual that I'm articulating this to, right? So I do think that there is a focus that should be had after you've done that to really read what AI has produced for you and ask yourself, will this resonate with the individual that I have this for, right? Because in a lot of ways, when I came into the professional field, I felt very different. I felt like it took me a long time to understand the corporate environment. I'm a kid from Spanish Harlem, right? I'm trying to stay true to some identity while also utilizing some education and some experience that I've had, right? And so in a lot of ways, I didn't have a large emotional intelligence, or at least I felt, because I didn't understand this corporate culture. And I think in using AI, we have to keep that in mind. Especially in the beginning, because it takes AI a little while to understand how you articulate. But even again, in doing so, that emotional intelligence component is understanding who's sitting across the table from me and how are they going to actually receive what's being output, and prompting AI in different ways to maybe consider those things so that it can have a more diversified, if you will, experience of your personality and your articulation.
I think that's great. And I think, with regard to leadership and strategy, AI is a tool. It's used in combination with a human, whether it's in the medical field or just as a leader. I also think it has the ability to democratize, because you can't send every one of your employees to leadership training sessions, but you can send everyone to the computer.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunities, but starting small, combining it with, people, us, ethical use, transparency. And so in transparency, last night when I got this assignment, I didn't Google, I went to Grok. And these are the 5 topics it said we should discuss. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. So let's just move in the last couple minutes. I'd like each of you, we're going to pivot away from AI. I would like each of you to talk to me about what you do for yourself as a leader so that you can continue to be strong, having put your own oxygen mask on for your staff, for your employees. What are the strategies or techniques you have found? For me, it's meditation. I learned about mindfulness and meditation during COVID. Running a medical practice in COVID was not a cakewalk, and it got me through.
So a couple things. Well, first, there's a running joke. So I love Dunkin' Donut coffee, and normally I don't drink anything other than Dunkin' Donuts, but today was exception. And so my team knows that if I have a small Dunkin' Donut cup, that's a good day. If it's medium, you can still come talk to me, but make sure you have a solution, right? If it's presenting a problem. And if it's a large, you just wait until another day, just do not enter, right? And so literally I'll be coming up in the elevator and someone's like, oh, I see it's a small. Good morning. And I'm like, thank you so much. Yes, it's a good day so far. Check me back out at lunchtime. But no, I actually started recently. I hired a personal trainer. Every time I'm working out, I'm like, why am I paying for this? This is brutal. And so that's actually been helpful and painful all at the same time. And then, like you, Susan, meditation. I started that kind of around the COVID timeframe. And then I started rereading the book, Brene Brown, which I just love her, Daring Greatly. So I've read it before, but rereading it as we're going just through a lot of transformation and just reminding myself that takes courage, and change is not always easy. It's also not easy for you personally whenever you're the one always having to, take it on the chin and sometimes in the gut as well. You have to be able to stay true to who you are and be able to just know that you're doing the right thing, even if it's a challenge. And so just reminding myself with some of those books have been helpful.
So I think I'm an X. So when I was a young X, geriatric X, whatever I am now, my theme in my professional life has kind of always been about balance. And so I think as a leader, you have to maintain balance. And so starting with yourself, you always have to be in tune. You're a person, you have mind, body, spirit, right? What are you out of balance? And you have to feed that. So I have different practices, right? Meditation is one of them. I do yoga, and because I think balance is my theme, I love paddle boarding. So that also helps with the body. And lately, it's also the communities I'm in. This is a community haven for me to throw tough questions at. And, I'm the most expert HR person in my company, but I have all these experts I can reach out to. That's also part of how I maintain my balance. And the last bit is, lately my friends make me laugh all the time and I seek them out. It's I need to laugh more often because it's crazy times we're living in, and it's just good to be silly and laugh at ridiculous things that are going on. So that's how I maintain balance.
Awesome. I love that. I was, raised by grandparents, and so I always say like I carry my ancestors around with me, and sometimes they're bickering back and forth in my head and I have to calm them down. I remember one saying I would hear all the time, and I would just associate it to a more practical use, and that is like, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? But as I've grown, especially in my profession, what I've learned is you have to diversify your happiness, right? Just like you do your money, diversification of your happiness is so important, and not putting everything in, or your purpose in only your work, or only your husband, because that's a lot of pressure for us, right? Or only your kids. And so, we go through tragic situations. We talk about COVID, we talk about the economic situation. And so we go through personal tragedies, loss of loved ones, the loss of spouses. And, what I find in being a people leader, which I always say, like, people are the most complex problem to solve, which is why I love the people space. But what I found is people who are able to really diversify their happiness when they go through the hardest of hardships are able to rely on those other buckets that they've diversified to pull them through and give them purpose. And it's about reminding people of that. And for me, that's what refills my emotional equity cup, right? So, yeah.
I love it. Diversify I love all these little quotes from all of you today. I hope you all feel that we've just experienced some great leadership right here with these people. I feel confident in our future going forward. But in the end, for all of you, it's really about knowing your purpose and believing in yourself. I mean, it's as simple as that, don't you think? So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Cal.